Hello, everyone, and welcome to Peace with Alex. It took me a while to get to this video. Had a few technical issues, but today what I want to do is discuss the book Untethered Soul by Michael A. Singer. Just read through this. It's quite a tome. It's like 295 pages, and it's very dense. It would be in my estimation, the second most dense book I've read. The first most dense wins out with Anarchy, State, and Utopia by Robert Nozick. I would like to maybe address that one day, but before I do that, I'm on a tangent, of course, is I want to go through John Rawls's A Theory of Justice, and then maybe compare the two. And discussion of that. There are 19 chapters in this book. It'll take a while to go through this, so these are my notes. So basically, I'll go through what's in the book, some of my own impressions of it, and I strongly recommend that if you get a chance, go pick this up. It's a great book. You can really learn a lot from this. So without further ado, let's go to the presentation here. And then, second, there we go. Okay, so this is it, The Untethered Soul by Michael A. Singer. Okay, so the first chapter is the voice inside your head. And basically what it talks about is that we have this constant inner monologue, I guess, sometimes a dialogue, but for the most part, a inner monologue, and how it basically states that you are not that voice, right? And that you have these thoughts that go on in your mind that sometimes are an attempt to control the world, but they have no impact, right? And a good example of this, of our inner voice, is that if somebody makes you angry, or there's a situation, I think that's a good example. If someone makes you angry, often what a lot of us do is we'll go through the argument, and this is what I would have said to the person, and we basically have this mental argument with this person. And oftentimes, certainly in my case, it does not ever manifest. It's just me releasing energy, and that's what this inner voice, especially when it is around anger, it's about releasing the energy. And what it is he goes into it about how it's control. We can't control the world, but we can control our mind. So our mind tries to control itself, maybe, and make attempts to control the world. So then, as a segue into the next chapter, it asks at the end of the first chapter, like, who is this voice exactly? What is it? And he called the voice the inner roommate. And it's almost like we have this other person that exists inside of us that, like, comments on life, has these, like, imaginary arguments, and narrates what goes on in our life. And that what he encourages us to do is to imagine that as a roommate, personify this voice that you have in your head. And this allows you to step back a bit, and now you can just become, rather than a participant that you have of your thoughts, you just become a watcher of your thoughts. And don't just step back a little bit and just watch what this roommate talks about and stuff like that, and just have this impassioned view of watching your roommate. And also think about sometimes if this were a roommate, and that roommate were giving you advice, think about some of the advice that this inner roommate that you have has actually given you. And you'll sometimes look back and you go, well, that wasn't very good advice. You may think, well, if this were an external person, you'd never take advice from them again. So then it goes a little bit deeper, and it asks, okay, well, you have this roommate inside of you, but exactly who is this? I mean, it is a part of you. And it goes into this idea of there was a yogi he talks about throughout this chapter, Ramana Maharshi, who talked a lot about that. Who am I? And in Buddhism, it is something that they do encourage people to discuss, to ask yourself, who am I? Don't know. Who am I? Don't know. And it goes on to like, okay, well, you ask somebody, well, who are you? They'll often give your name. And certainly in my case, I'm not the only one who has this name. There are other people who have this name. So it's not really your name. Sometimes people may ask, well, they'll go through their life events. Well, I went to university. I studied maybe accounting. I work as an accountant, and I work for this business or whatever. And it's like, but wait a minute, step back a bit. That's just, you're not the only person who studied accounting at that university, and you might not even be the only accountant, even at that company that you're working for. So all that is just a sequence of life events. And then sometimes people might use their physical description. Okay, well, I'm 5'11", 200 pounds, and all that stuff. But then you can question that because, well, you weren't 5'11" when you were 4 years old. You're completely, our physical appearance changes over time. It is stable for a certain amount of time, but when we're very young and as we get into our older age, our physical appearance does change. So basically, when we think of this inner roommate or this inner dialogue that we have, looking out at the world, it talks about how this is that inner roommate is a subject looking at the objects in the outer world. And not only the outer world, when we look out at the trees and the cars and the things in our apartment and stuff like that, but even in the inner world, our thoughts, feelings, and emotions. And we have this constant flow. Those are just objects that occur within us. So if you were the subject looking at the outer and inner world, who is the subject? And he goes on to propose that it's just, which I happen to agree with, it's just your pure consciousness. That is who you really are. You're just consciousness. And then as a thought experiment, imagine if the objects in the world didn't exist. Maybe think about people who live on a desert island, right? They don't have cars. They completely change their exterior, or even people who, maybe they're sick and they're in a hospital room for a while. It doesn't change who they are. They're still the same person. So if you change your outer world, you still remain who you are. But imagine if your consciousness didn't exist, then that's a different question. Then you can say, then you can really say, well, then I no longer exist. So he doesn't go into this, but I thought of this as, imagine you are in the back seat of a car. You're not the driver, because if you watch your thoughts throughout the day, it almost feels like you don't even have control. You think such random things that come in. So imagine you're in the back seat, you're in a car, and you're driving down. And I would argue, imagine that you're not going anywhere specific. It's like a Sunday drive, because we may have goals in our life, but nobody really knows what the end goal, what the ultimate, where we're going to be when we're in our 80s, just in our last dying days. Very few people can predict what's going to happen. So imagine you're in the back seat, you're looking out the window, and you're just observing. You're seeing the trees pass by, buildings pass by, children playing in a park, cars, and you're just observing things go by. that is really almost who you are. You're that consciousness. It's just observing. And then he goes a little deeper into this about the lucid self. So when we go back to the last chapter about being pure consciousness, that's who you are. We don't have a lot of discussion or education unless you specialize in that. There are people who do, but most of us don't have much education or discussion or thinking about consciousness, right? And then it talks about, well, how is it that we can, if somebody says, hey, pay attention to this, or pay attention to that, to me or this or whatever, we can actually place our consciousness into a state of focus, right? We have that will. So, and then it goes on to discuss how, for most of us, our emotional life has sort of a baseline, and what we try to do is avoid disturbances to that baseline. So anything that sort of knock us off balance is the way I like to put it. And then he talks about how we can lose ourselves sometimes by using the analogy of a movie. So sometimes if you watch a really good movie, he sort of distinguishes between at home or at the theater, but I think in either case, you can lose yourself so much in that movie. It's really engaging that you don't see the time pass by, and you almost lose awareness of your surroundings, what's in your apartment while you're watching TV, or your house, or you forget that you're even in a movie theater if the movie's engaging enough. And then he says, what if we were to take that a step further, right? And then rather than, so most movies, they, at least for most of my life, it's been sight and sound. But they have also, I've been in movies where they have like haptic feedback, I think it's called, in the seats, where, there's an explosion, the seat will shake. But imagine you go beyond that, and it's like now smells. Imagine you could actually plug in to the emotions of the character and the thoughts of the character. If you were able to do that, you would literally lose yourself in the movie. If all five senses in your inner world were just completely synced with that character. And if you can imagine that, that's really how you're going through life, is that you are basically watching this movie where you're hooked into everything: sight, sound, taste, smell, and everything. So, and you're just observing this. And then it goes into the fact of, imagine if you could then take your consciousness, the self, and rather than focus it on an object, replace subject and object, imagine if consciousness could come back on itself and then focus on itself, right? Then the point of that is then you become aware that you're aware. You become conscious of your own conscious. It's sort of circular, but it gets kind of deep. So it's sort of a thought experiment. And then it goes into the chapter of infinite energy, and how we have this inner energy as opposed to external energy. So you may get sick, you may get hungry, and your energy may go down. But sometimes, like, you can be healthy, like physically healthy. You're not sick, and you could be eating fine. But if you're going through a rough patch in life, you may find that you don't have any energy, and that's your inner energy. And that all this stuff that goes on inside of you has has energy to it, your thoughts, feelings, and emotions. It can either give you energy or take away energy. And that, depending on life events, sometimes what we can do is we can react in such a way that we close off that energy. We close, and that is usually the result is because we're closing our heart, or we are closing our mind. And if you want to keep that energy flowing, you want to keep your heart and your mind open all the time to allow that flow for an energy. But what we tend to do is we will react to a situation, close our heart, or even close our mind. And this is not a physical thing, it's a psychological thing that we do. And basically what it is that we have events that have happened in our life that sort of stick with us. And he doesn't use this term, but I think really what he's talking about are triggers, right? So if you're not sure what I mean by a trigger, have you ever been in a situation where somebody said something or something happened, you react, and it could be explosive or something. And then when you reminisce on the situation, you think to yourself, man, my reaction was out of proportion to the actual event or what that person said. And what that triggers are, when we react like that, what we're doing is we're trying to protect ourselves, right? Which is a natural human reaction, but what we want to try to do is deal with those triggers and keep that energy flowing. Keep that through love, enthusiasm, excitement. Keep that energy, and basically, what you want to do is work on your triggers and keep your heart and mind open as much as you can. And try to bring yourself to a state where your heart and mind are always open and you always have this energy flowing through you. The next chapter gets into the secrets of the spiritual heart, and now it focuses really on opening and closing your heart. And it goes into, it talks about, if you're aware of the chakra system, so there are 7 chakras in the body. Heart is one of them. And the chakras are like they're energy centers, right? And in can't remember, I think it's Sanskrit, or in the yogic tradition, it's called samskara. So it's basically another word for a trigger. And if you were to think of this whole system of how we react and interact with the world, imagine that you have a self that's like a CPU in your computer. It's a processing unit, and that your eyes and your ears, which are our 2 most important sensory organs, but feel, taste, touch, smell, all the other ones, imagine those are just simply sensors. And that's very much how it is. All your eyes do is just bring sensory input into your visual cortex, and your visual cortex processes that information. So imagine, instead of being attached to these your sensory organs, imagine it being like electronic devices. If you were to put a camera up and you put batteries in it, but you don't connect it to anything, it doesn't do much. It's only when you take that camera and you put it into a recording device, or, now in this modern day of computing, you can put it into processing units that we use AI to basically process what happens in the camera. And we can do the same thing with audio. So imagine that CPU unit, that is your mind. What your mind is doing, it's processing all the experiences that have come in, and all the experiences, it may process experiences that happened in your past. And going back to that trigger analogy, think of the trigger as sort of like a glitch in the processing or the software, right? And so how he describes it is that we take in an experience, our mind processes it, and if our mind is unable to process it, it can pass that on to our heart. And if our heart can't process it, then we have what's called a block. And that block just becomes stored energy. And it's sort of like a circular energy that just stays stuck. It doesn't go anywhere. There's no in or out. It just stays there. And that, he doesn't use the term, but that to me is a trigger. And then we have those. So those are mostly negative things on triggers, but then you can have a positive trigger. You can get overly excited about something, and even in the yogic tradition, samskara can be negative or positive. And if it's a positive thing, it can become known as a clinging. Buddhists use this term too. So we can sometimes. I recently had a client of mine talking about how they stopped getting attached to the cars they bought because they had a couple of cars stolen and they were heartbroken. And I thought, I'm not getting into that anymore. So I'm no longer going to cling to my car. So basically, what he recommends is that we should do our best, especially in the present day, try to allow those experiences to flow through us rather than get blocked. And I would say try to process your past triggers that are stored up inside of you so that they are no longer a trigger in the future going forward. And then, so basically, the analogy that he uses is a trigger causes our hearts to close. So how do we stop our heart from closing and just allowing that energy to flow through us, right? So we have to understand it for what it is. A trigger is psychological protection. And what we need to do is, I don't know if he uses the term, but we kind of have to abandon that need for protection. And I would just add a caveat here. If there's abuse going on, then that's a different thing. We do need to protect ourselves from abuse, but often we'll react to situations as a protection mechanism when no harm was intended. We're just interpreting the situation wrong. Or that person really, when we really, really think about it, that person can't really harm us. They're just abrupt and rude, and they're just difficult to be around. So when you feel in the present moment, remember going back to that, we have this emotional baseline, right? And we can get knocked off balance. And when we feel ourselves getting knocked off balance, don't follow that energy. Just basically try to shift your awareness back to the center and let that energy go. And that is going to be easier said than done. And this is one of the things that a lot in this book, it's practice. It really would take you years to master this, if not an entire lifetime. So try to think about things. What can you do? What are the little things that bother you that you can just start letting go of? And just build yourself up from there. So like, let's say someone asks to borrow a pen, and then they never return it, right? Can you let that go? And just get yourself another pen. Just go out and maybe it's a situation where you can't get that pen back. They just borrowed it and took off with it, let's say. let that go and don't follow the energy into, oh, well, first it's going to be the pen and then it's going to be this and that. And next thing you know, it just goes on, because that's where our mind will go. So you have to, and it's this attraction and repulsion that we go through daily life, and we have to detach. We have to go back, and this is a theme that he goes through, touches on throughout the entire book, where we have to become observers of our life and sort of detach from it. And then basically, if you can start small and build up from there and keep practicing at this, eventually you'll get to a point where nothing will bother you. You'll just go through life, and you'll just have this constant joy and happiness, I guess. Which, going back to one of the earlier talks that I did, there's going to be ebbs and flows in our emotional state, ups and downs, but we won't get so knocked off balance that it affects us for a while. And I'll give you an analogy of this. I recently, and I happened to be reading the book at the time, and so it came at a good time. I was given some bad news recently, and my mind immediately went into problem-solving mode. So, like, for a whole day, I was saying, well, how do I solve this problem? And I started ruminating on it and just thinking about it. Then it came a second day, and I'm still thinking about it and trying to solve the problem, just ruminating on these things. Then came the third day. On the third day, I had to basically stop and say to myself, you're spinning. And acknowledge the fact that this problem, it didn't have a solution, right? I just had to accept the problem for what it is and just live with it. And it is a problem that's going to cause some inconvenience in my life for a little bit. But I'm just going to have to accept that. So once I stopped myself and literally said, Alex, stop spinning on this, I was able to let that go and move on to just move on with my life and not let it drag me down. And this goes into the next chapter of letting go, right? So basically it talks about fear, and that's what it was. It's like, oh, well, it struck up some fear in me. And we do react out of our fear in an attempt to protect ourselves. And because of those fears, we have, and I sort of missed a point, but we have a I'll explain it this way, okay? We have expectations, we all do, of how people should behave and how the world should operate. And what we do is we try to arrange our lives, or so that people will meet those expectations, or the world will meet our expectations. But this is not really realistic, right? So we have to come to the understanding and acceptance that we can't control people and we can't control the world, right? And we got to get rid of that fear that people in the world are not going to operate according to our expectations, right? Because once that happens, then what happens is the fear comes in. Then we either get triggered from something in our past, or we can even install new triggers, right? And what happens is that energy gets trapped, and this happens throughout our life. So this goes back to the consciousness and where we're going to put that consciousness. So remember, there was that statement about we have the will, we have the ability to place the focus of our consciousness on something, right? And a good example of this is that you're going about your day, and then all of a sudden you stub your toe, and it's pretty bad. Think about what happens is that everything you were thinking about and everything about the world stops, and all now you can think about is your toe being stubbed. Right? All immediately your consciousness goes there, and sometimes, in my case, and I think in a lot of people, when we get hurt, anger wells up in us because it's that psychologists would call it. So it's our limbic brain, and you might swear and shout and yell for a little bit until you get back to a state of state of normalcy. So when you have these reactions, and then if you can catch yourself before you get to 100, stop yourself before you get to 100, and pause, right? And the reason being is that what happens is these reactions can get dramatic, and we can overreact. So I'll give you an analogy. Let's say, you text your spouse, and it's like after work, and you don't hear from them for like 3 hours. And you think, oh my goodness, like what's going on here? Like, and then your mind starts to go on, and you start to think all these crazy thoughts. And next thing you know, your mind is telling you, pack up your things, move in with a friend, write a letter to your spouse saying, this is it, and we're done. And, and then 3.5 hours later, you find out, you get a text, and you're at your friend's, you're moved in, you're all ready to call it quits on this relationship. You get a text, and it's like, oh, sorry, hon, my car broke down, and I forgot my phone at the office, so I had to get it towed into a mechanic. The mechanic finally got it fixed. I drove back to the office. I'm back at the office. I'm going to be home in half an hour, and it's like, oh, okay, let's hope I can get home in half an hour, because I've just done something drastic, right? So allow yourself to take that pause, take a deep breath, and say, okay, well, is my reaction to the situation appropriate for the situation as it stands? And that will prevent you from not only overreacting to the situation, but also feeding into those past triggers and install new triggers for going forward. So the next chapter goes into what he calls the inner thorn. So basically, the analogy he uses is that we all have pain in our life, and imagine if we were to take that pain and turn it into a thorn that's stuck in our arm or something like that. How a lot of people will react to that pain that we have in our lives, if it were a thorn, as an analogy, is that we adapt, right? So we'll go and we'll take bandages and we'll put it around the thorn, or we'll go throughout life so that, maybe when we're walking, maybe it's in our right arm, right? So we'll walk so that we sort of favor our left arm going forward, so nobody touches the right arm. And then, and it can get to the point where maybe what we'll do is we'll build devices that can get us through life without nobody ever touching that inner thorn, and it all gets very complicated, and we have our whole life is adapted to just not touching this thorn that's in our arm. And if you could step back for a bit and you realize the amount of energy that you expend to avoid triggering those pain points that you have in yourself, you expend a ton of energy. And it goes back to this thing that you if you look at yourself as just pure consciousness, observing your own life, then that allows you to detach from the pain that you feel. You're just observing that pain. And that when that pain comes up, rather than clinging to it, just observe it. Don't reject it, but just say, oh, here's that pain again. And then the more you can do that, the more you can, as he calls it, fall backward into that role of observer in your life, the more that will open up your heart and your mind and allow those energies to flow through you. So if you can try to do that, and again, I think it's wise to go back to start on the small stuff. What are your little triggers that you can start working on, and then move your way up so that you've managed to resolve all your triggers in life. Now, he doesn't talk about this, but I do want to put a caveat on this, is that some of the events that happen in life are so psychologically scarring that we end up with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. He doesn't go into it, but in my opinion, I think that's a different ballgame. I think that this whole idea of removing the inner thorn, when we're talking with PTSD, I don't know how applicable it is, because to me, it would be an oversimplification. If there's PTSD that you need to deal with in your life, it's a process, and it takes some work to go through. And just all I would say, if you're in that situation, be gentle with yourself and allow yourself that time, and just have that self-compassion to understand you went through a major event in your life, and that it's going to take time. It's a difference between, I would take it as, if you, get a cut, and even if you need a few stitches to get a cut, right, to get a cut repaired, within short order, you'll have the stitches out, and you might have a small scar, but nothing major. Versus as if you were in a major accident and you had broken bones and things like that, and it took time, and you had to go through months, if not a year more, of physiotherapy to get over that. Well, that's what that second situation was like. PTSD. Think of it as like you were in a major psychological accident. So anyhow, just to wrap up on this chapter, rather than be conscious of the energy you expend trying to avoid pain, and see if there's ways that being gentle with yourself, and if it's not too major a trigger, is just to simply work on that pain, remove the thorn, and then you're dealing with the source of the problem rather than the problem itself. So the next thing he talks about is stealing freedom from your soul. I would say I don't quite understand why he titled this chapter that, but he opens up to, I'm going to go into a Buddhist concept here called dukkha, D-U-K-K-H-A. And if you're at all familiar with Buddhism, Buddhism talks about how life is suffering. And I originally thought it was that, but I have read other writers on Buddhism, and the translation the original word goes a little deeper. I can't remember whether it's a Pali or a Sanskrit word. It's a little deeper, and the translation I like is unsettled. We go through our life is a matter of being unsettled. So, and when we look at our psyche and how it operates, and going back to that inner roommate, personifying our psyche, we'll realize that our psyche is a little disturbed, and that we have to think about what our psyche goes into, like the job that we've given it to do. And that goes back to, we have all these expectations about how people should behave and how the world should operate. And we have this expectation that everybody does things I like, everybody likes me, and everybody does things that I like, and that nobody is ever going to do something that will upset me, either intentionally or unintentionally. And when we really think about that expectation, it starts to start looking unrealistic, right? And that what happens, and the other thing too, is that our mind, our psyche, from that protection, it's always looking out for problems, right? So what happens is that, and we all experience this, we can solve today's problem, but tomorrow there'll be another problem, or next week there's going to be a problem, or a month from now there's going to be a problem. We always have problems that we have to deal with, right? So what you need to do is basically fire your mind on this and say, well, and I'm not saying if there are problems to deal with, just ignore them. Problems don't resolve themselves on their own. But don't become so attached to these problems, and don't and stop. Just like going back to that analogy of the bad news where I kept spinning. Tell your mind and tell your psyche to stop trying to fix a problem, especially when they are non-fixable. There are many situations in life that are crappy, and it's like we have to come to a place of acceptance and not trying to give our mind the jobs of trying to fix a problem that all we can do is just accept it and move on. And then the other thing too is abandon. This goes back to the thing of people behaving to our expectations and the world operating to our expectations. We have to let go of our need to control other people and how the world operates. It's the world goes as it is. So one of the things he sort of gets into is that our mind, and it's not to put down the mind. The mind is great for analysis and breaking things apart and trying to figure out how to solve problems. That's we are very good at that as humans, but try to transfer your analytical mind into observing mind. And this, of course, it just applies to your life. Many of us get paid on the simple basis that we need bring our analytical mind to our jobs. That's just how life works. So if you can practice this, moving from analytical mind into observing mind, you'll get into this state where you're just aware of being aware. You're just pure consciousness, observing the world pass by you. Then, we've talked a lot about pain up to this point, and that we come back to this thing that we expend a lot of energy trying to avoid pain in our life, rather than taking that thorn, the proverbial thorn out. And imagine that if that were to happen in real life, right? And it was, let's say, is really deep in your shoulder. And it is going to hurt to take that thorn out. But really, if you think about it, you're better off living through that short-term pain of getting that thorn out, rather than spending your life trying to work around that pain. And and how we do that is just going back to this constant theme of just becoming aware, just becoming an observer in our life. And this goes back to the feelings that will rise up within it. Feelings are just feelings. Don't cling to them. And understand too, and this goes into the Buddhist concept of impermanence, right? And this includes a feeling. The feelings that we have throughout our day, our week, our month, our year, our entire life. Just ride it like a wave. So we can let go of this desire to avoid pain and just work through it and allow that pain to pass through us. Then what's going to happen is we'll allow that energy to go through. And I think this is a good thing, is where he starts to come into this analogy of a house, right? And also clinging. So imagine your dream spot for where you'd like a house. It could be on an island, could be in the woods, could be on a mountain, wherever you like. And imagine you were given the money. This is the ideal location to build your house, right? You build the most beautiful house that you can possibly imagine, wherever you like. But imagine you start to become attached to this house. It's beautiful. Everything inside the house, you have all the food that you want. Anything that you want to do, it's in the house. And you become so attached to living inside that house, now you're in a state where you never want to go outside. You just want to live in that house all the time. And you might be happy living in this house, but you'll come to a point where you'll stop realizing that you are imprisoned in that house. You don't allow yourself to ever leave. So that is almost like how a consciousness is. We seal off our consciousness in this fortress. It's a very comfortable fortress, and we may be happy there, but it is still a fortress, and we are still unknowingly imprisoning ourselves within this fortress. So basically, how you want to break out of this fortress is, imagine the walls. The walls, those are our triggers and our pain points, right? And as we go to those walls, that's where we challenge our ideas of how people should behave and how the world should operate. And it also challenges our own self-concept, right? So what we have to do is push ourselves into those walls, and live with that pain for a bit. And then once that wall dissolves, imagine then we can go to the next wall and then push that boundary. So this is where we start to get into pushing our boundaries about this, right? So we explore where our pain points and our trigger points is, and we sit there for a while. We allow that energy to pass through, and then once we get to the point where that is no longer a trigger for us, that wall dissolves, then we can move on to the next wall. Sort of repeating myself, I understand. And that the other thing too is that this will take time, because depending on how old you are, it is your entire life up to this point that has built those walls around you and built those, installed those trigger points for you. So basically, it means getting out of the out of this comfort zone, and just keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And then the other thing too I want to mention, he doesn't really get into this. One of the interesting things about life is that humans and many people who anthropologists would argue that the reason why humans have done so well, we're not the strongest creatures on the planet, but we are the most adaptable. We adapted throughout things. And an interesting thing that you'll find is that as people get more comfortable in life, they move the goalpost, right? So it's like, oh, okay, now I don't have to drive like in used vehicles that are last. Now I can go out and get a new vehicle. And you get adapted to that. And it's like, okay, well, it's not such a big deal driving a new vehicle every year. And then you think, oh, well, I want to upgrade to a nicer vehicle. And then once you upgrade that, it's like, no big deal. I'm driving around in a Mercedes-Benz. It's just a car. You adapt to that and it becomes nothing special. And then, and that's what we do. We keep moving the goalpost. So you have to understand that, at least when it comes to life, and pushing those boundaries, we can go on into infinity. That's a different thing. But understand that I think the point that I'm trying to make here is that allow yourself to be uncomfortable, not in the sense of like having a comfortable life and comfortable surroundings. That's a different thing. In that sense, allow yourself to be comfortable and just think, wow, be grateful, I think. And maybe I'll go into that at some point in time. But keep pushing those boundaries until all your triggers are gone. And now you're into the infinite. There are no boundaries that you have. So in this next thing about letting go of false solidity, I lost my notes to this. Oh, there we go. So here, this goes back to our need for control. We have to let go of this control and our concept of self and concept of how others behave, how others should behave rather than how the world should operate. And we hold on to this. And what we need to do is understand that what we're holding on to is not real, right? That life is fluid, it's dynamic. Imagine trying to hold on to a radio signal. You can't. Or holding on to water is another analogy. But understand too that what we're trying to do is find certainty. We all want certainty in life and stability. And imagine that certainty as the wall. It's very comforting, but at the same time, that certainty can keep you imprisoned. So what we need to do is let go of our concepts of ourselves, how others should behave, and how the world should operate. And then as we start to approach, especially when it comes to the self-conscious self or self-concept, that's what I mean, and we start questioning who we are, going back to the very early chapters, we'll have a moment of an existential crisis, right? And what we need to do is get comfortable with that, and just basically try to live life of just pure consciousness, the awareness of being aware. And then what we go on to is happiness in our life. So you might have heard this before, that there are only two core emotions, I guess, in life, and that's pain or fear. Or no, not pain or fear. Fear and love. Sorry, I made a mistake on that. We're either in a state of fear or we're in a state of love or happiness, I guess. And if you were to ask people like, well, do you want to be happy? Most people will say yes. But then when you scratch the surface a little bit, you'll realize that, well, what if you lose your job? What if your relationship breaks down? What if your mortgage is foreclosed? What if this happens or that happens? What if someone dies? And then when you think about this, you realize that we all want happiness, but it's conditional on certain things, right? Well, if I know I'll be happy if this doesn't happen. So in this chapter, we need to remove all these conditions and understand that happiness is in fact a choice. And this goes back to outside of the book, where we focus a lot on happiness, but I don't think that's what we want to focus on. What we want is peace in our life. So I think it would be very strange if your loved one, let's say it's your parent, if a parent dies, it would be very odd to be happy about that. And even in the case of maybe the parents weren't all that nice to you, and this is a deeper subject that is called complicated grief. Because even people who had abusive parents, they do suffer grief. They don't always say, "Oh, well, I'm happy that person is dead." So. However, getting back to this analogy about unhappiness if someone dies, you can still be at peace with that. And that peace, so where he uses that word happiness, I'm going to revert to or convert that into peace, right? Our peace must be non-conditional. We have to look at ourselves and say, I deserve peace regardless of what happens. And that the challenges that come up in life, rather than look at them as people not meeting our expectations or people putting roadblocks down or look at this in a negative sense, start to shift your mind and say, okay, well, this situation or person was put in front of me to teach me something. Look at those things as a learning opportunity. And if you can keep that peace within yourself and always keep that peace open and your heart open, you'll start to feel this energy go through and start to make your peace non-conditional. You deserve peace regardless. I'm just going to state that. And then this is basically the whole point of the non-resistance. It goes back to this repeating theme of being just an observer in your life. Just allow life to happen. And surrender, if you are at all familiar with 12-step programs, they talk about surrendering to life. So that's basically the point of that thing. I'm not going to get into death, contemplating death. This is a Buddhist concept. I think there may be other spiritual traditions, but suffice it to say that as you go through your life, try to be aware that you're a mortal being, that there'll come a point. And then if you want to go into it further, I did do something on The 5 Regrets of the Dying, written by Bronnie Ware. And then we go into, it's interesting, I thought this chapter would have been about the Buddha. It's not. But Buddhism is sometimes called the middle way. So I'll just give you a brief background on that. Buddha was a prince. He grew up in very privileged surroundings. And basically he looked at his life, and it was a life of excess. So when he saw the suffering in the world, he had been blocked off from that, but somehow, I can't remember the exact story, but he actually managed to go out the walls of his palace and see the suffering in the world. And he abandoned his life of excess, and he went to the other extreme, and he said he became an ascetic. He was, emaciated, and lived the life of an ascetic, but he found in that he wasn't really finding a spiritual freedom. So he went to the middle path, right? You don't want to go to the extreme. But I was not aware of this, that in this book, it actually is the Tao Te Ching. The Tao, the yin and yang, is actually also an explanation of living life in the middle way. Don't live in extremes. And this goes back to how, as human beings, we can think in extremes, and we can react in extremes, right? And it is sort of like, imagine our reactions like a pendulum. Right? So if a situation brings us all to one side and we let that pendulum go, that energy is going to bring us all the way to the other side. And think about the amount of energy, if you've ever swung a pendulum like that, it can go on for quite a while, and that's energy that's being expended. But so one thing that you may have seen or witnessed with some people in your life is that they're in the dating world, or they just broke up, and it could be they date man or woman, whatever, and they'll say, I'm swearing off man, or I'm swearing off woman, I'm just going to stay single all my life, because it's just too difficult. That's us jumping to the extreme, just on the basis of maybe a couple of bad experiences, and then we paint everyone with the same brush, which is not true, right? Once we get back to a point of centeredness, we realize, oh well, I'm just being unreasonable here. So basically, in the Tao, when the yin and yang, everything in life has a yin and yang, and it also has its balance point, including us, right? And that what we want to try to do is try to avoid going to an extreme. And sometimes what will happen, again, going back to the swearing off men or women, people will get stuck there, and they'll stay single for a fair amount of time. And that's just one situation. But in many situations, we get stuck in a certain extreme way of thinking or acting. Again, going back to this awareness of when you feel yourself getting shifted off balance, don't stay there too long. Gently bring yourself back to the center, and understand. I think the last point I want to make on this is get rid of or abandon your concept of self, because that will always change. Let go of your concepts of how other people should behave. Let go of how you think the world should operate. and just again, getting back to that main theme, is just be the consciousness that observes life pass by. The last thing he goes into, which I don't discuss much in this, and there's a reason why, because the whole point of this podcast is about happiness. And as far as I'm aware, I haven't, or rather, I'm going to say this, I'm unaware if that there is any studies done whether atheists are necessarily unhappier than people who are spiritual. So if you ask people who are spiritual, who either believe in God or however that is for them, or a higher power, they will tell you that, oh, well, that contributes to my happiness. But I'm pretty sure if you ask an atheist, they'll say exactly the same thing. So maybe at some point in time, I'll go into this a little deeper. So simply because this starts to, and throughout the book, he doesn't get too much into a certain faith. Although this book is considered a spiritual book, there are some passages from the Bible that he quotes. So again, even if you are atheist, I still recommend this is a pretty good read. And in that case, try not to think of it as a spiritual book, and that this is really, try to think of it in a scientific way, because there are scientists who do explore what is consciousness, and philosophical discussions as to what is consciousness without getting into theological discussion. So that's pretty much all that is. So that was very, very lengthy, but I don't know. Yeah, so I've been going on an hour, which I kind of figured as much. But again, if you get a chance, look this up on Amazon, order it on your Kindle, or if you like hard copy. I happen to have a hard copy of it. It's a dense book, so give yourself time. And yeah, I hope you got something out of this. And yeah, so take care, everyone. And I'll keep these coming out, and hopefully, these talks, I can bring more peace into the world, and more, as I think it's an overused term, but I'll use it anyhow, more happiness in the world. Take care, everyone.